Hey y'all, oh God, sorry. Texas has been coming out. It's the hair. The bigger the hair, the closer to God. Uh, so I wanted to talk a little bit about polycystic ovarian syndrome and how fasting can help and why fasting would be particularly effective if you're suffering from PCOS. So, um, when PCOS started upticking in the population, doctors, the general thing that they would do was they would put you on some sort of hormonal birth control. If a doctor puts you on birth control for polycystic ovarian syndrome in 2019, you need to run, or you need to make sure that they explain what the hell they're doing to find out if you have something else going on. Because polycystic ovarian syndrome is not a disease of the female reproductive system hormones. It's not an estrogen-based disease. It's an insulin-based disease. And what happens is if you are gaining a lot of weight, your cells become resistant to insulin because after a certain amount of sugar in your cells, it's toxic. Now, your ovaries, because it's helpful to know in the evolutionary we are mammals sense whether or not there's enough food to support a pregnancy. So your ovaries actually have way more insulin receptor cells than other types of cells. I think they actually have more insulin uptake organelles. I'm forgetting the term for it, but basically they have more receptors for insulin than I think any other cell except cancer cells. I'll have to double check that. But basically they have like 2 to 3 times the number of the number of receptors for insulin that other cell types have, because it's important for the ovaries to know whether or not there's enough food to, like, should we ovulate? Should we even bother ovulating? So once you start on the pathway for metabolic syndrome, so metabolic syndrome is the slow and steady pathway to type 2 diabetes. It starts with insulin resistance, and then you end up with, they used to call it like syndrome X. You end up with all of these other issues happening, all the way up to full-fledged type 2 diabetes. So, basically, if you have polycystic ovarian syndrome, especially if you want to have kids, I highly suggest you follow Dr. Jason Fung's protocol. Buy his book, watch his YouTube videos. Don't listen to me. I'm not a doctor. I'm just a random nerdy chick on the internet who's been doing this. But type 2 diabetes, Jason Fung has found that if you fast for 21 days, in a row is best, you can reverse most type 2 diabetes because it resets your blood sugars, and it resets the insulin receptors on your cells. So I am at day 19 of fasting, and my blood sugars are almost completely normal, and I was on the high end of medication for a type 2 diabetic. You normally saw the kind of medication that I take in like a 60-year-old who's been diabetic for 20 years. I was taking 100 units of insulin and 1,000 milligrams of metformin, and my blood sugars were only getting down into the 250s. So very diabetic, and within 19 days my blood sugars are now in the normal range. Now I'm not eating, but they're in the normal range. So as a, just me, I'm not reading any of the science articles, but just experimenting on myself, I know that fasting completely does amazing things to increase your cell's receptivity to insulin. And I've been breaking my fast once a week and eating, so I've been watching how my body's been reacting to eating sugar, and the reactions to eating carbs and sugar have gotten a lot better. So if you want to have a kid, and you have polycystic ovarian syndrome, I would recommend that you try fasting for 21 days and see how that impacts your polycystic ovarian syndrome. Because odds are pretty good that you'll be able to substantially reverse your polycystic ovarian syndrome to the point where your periods are probably going to be a lot less painful. I haven't had my period. I'm about 2. I haven't had my period since I started fasting, but I'm not having nearly as much pain. I have actually got a birth control implant I'm still adjusting to, because my periods were so painful that, like, I would literally have cramps that would drop me to the ground, and I have a crazy high pain tolerance because I have an autoimmune pain disorder. So, like if the cramps are bad enough to take me to my knees, like, we're talking, like, I've taken baseball bats to the ribs and not even staggered. Like, I've got a really high pain threshold. So, your pain levels for your periods are going to probably drop. Your periods will probably get a lot more regular, and a lot of the cysts will probably start resolving themselves. I haven't checked any studies, but just as a gut instinct and intuition, feminine intuition, I'm also pretty sure that polycystic ovarian syndrome and fatty liver syndrome tend to go together. And clearing up fatty liver syndrome, again, Dr. Fung, depending on how bad it is, in the 21-day period, you lose weight. I calculated it out today, and even with my once a week refeeds, I'm losing on average 0.61 pounds a day. And since I'm refeeding, I know that that's not all water and you know, all that stuff. So there's the weight loss, which will help. There's the increase in insulin sensitivity, which will help reduce it. And when you fast, visceral fat, the fat around your organs, is the first to go. And the one thing that may be kicking everything into high gear if you have polycystic ovarian syndrome is fat produces estrogen. So the one thing there where I'm like, yeah, maybe some of that estrogenic stuff is playing a role here, is if you have extra fat in your abdomen, next to your organs, next to your uterus and your ovaries, that's producing extra estrogen, that could also be fucking your shit up. That's a technical term. But it's worth a try. It is a hell of a lot cheaper than Clomid and metformin. It doesn't have any of the side effects of Clomid and metformin. And if you do it for a month and you lose 20 pounds, you're probably going to have a much healthier, less stressful, more successful pregnancy. And clearing out all of the fat from your liver, and if you have any fat buildup in your pancreas, that will help dramatically reduce your chances of getting gestational diabetes too, which tends to go, like, if you do get pregnant while you have polycystic ovarian syndrome, the pregnancy tends to be a lot harder on you, like way harder, much higher chances of gestational diabetes, more complications, like it's just shittier. And like, babies are awesome, but pregnancy is shitty enough. We don't need to do anything to increase how crappy you're gonna feel while you're pregnant. So I hope that was helpful. If you haven't heard about any of this stuff before, don't just take my word on it. I am a rando on the internet. Like, you may know and love me for years, but still, I'm a rando on the internet. Like, your doctor might not know this stuff, but there's lots of studies that you can read. There's lots of science articles about it you can read. There's not a lot specifically about fasting and polycystic ovarian syndrome, but pretty much anything about fasting and diabetes is going to apply to you. Even if you're not officially a type 2 diabetic, your metabolism is heading that way, and it's the same damage. It's just further down the road. So, yeah, like I said, I really hope that that's helpful for someone, and it gives someone an incentive to, like, try this instead of, like, the injections and the pills and the suffering and the trying over and over and over again. I have some really close friends who've struggled with infertility, and it is brutal and miserable and lonely, and frankly, fasting isn't that hard. Like, the first part is hard. It gets easier the more you do it. And if you honestly can't go without food for 2 days, you probably don't have the patience and willpower to handle an infant. Because, yeah, there's a whole lot of, like, sleepless nights, and, like, it doesn't get any easier when they're teenagers. You have, like, a brief period when they're in, like, late elementary school where you can relax a little, and then middle school, you can't relax anymore. Like, being a parent is ridiculously hard, and going without food for 2 days, like 2 to 3 days is where the difficulty of fasting peaks. Once you hit 3 days, it's seriously all downhill. It gets easier and easier and easier. I am on, like I said, I'm on day 19. I don't have a lot of willpower. Look, you can see, like, when it comes to food, I have no fucking willpower. That's part of why I'm fasting, is to develop some willpower against food. So, it's a good thing to sort of develop your patience while you can still get a full night's sleep, and it will probably save you a tremendous amount of suffering if you have polycystic ovarian syndrome and you want a baby, or even if you don't want a baby and you're just suffering and in pain. Like, life is hard enough. We don't need extra shit making our lives harder. You know, it's hard enough to be a good person and take care of everyone around you and try to, like, leave a positive mark in the world and, you know, clean your house and be a good friend and all of the stuff that we all have to do, and, like, oh yeah, getting a job to pay for all of our crap. You know, life is hard. Anything that we can do to make it easier for ourselves, we should totally do. Which is why I'm going to win the lottery tomorrow and hire a maid service so I don't have to scrub my toilets anymore. Anyway, darlings, I hope that's helpful. I hope that even if this hasn't convinced you to give it a try, it will have helped open the door to thinking about it seriously as an option and start looking it up and researching it. Okay. I believe in you. I know you can do it. Asta, darling.